Welcome to C programming tutorial. This tutorial is part of a collection of tutorials. You can see the link of the playlist either on the screen or in the description of the video. I would highly recommend that you watch the other tutorials if you haven't watched them so far. In today's tutorial we are going to talk about do-while loop. In the past like 2-3 tutorials we have been talking about different kinds of loops. We first talked about while loop and then we talked about the for loop. In this tutorial we are going to talk about the do-while loop. And before I start, I would recommend that you become the fan of the Facebook page if you came here from Facebook, or you subscribe to this channel so that you can be notified of any new videos that I post. Okay, so let's get started. So in the previous tutorial we saw the while loop. Do-while loop is very much the same way. Just a reminder, while loop is basically you have a condition, while followed by condition, and then you have statements just like that. And so basically when the control comes over here, first thing that does is it evaluates this condition. If this condition is true, then the body of the while loop, which in this particular example has only one statement, but it could be the syntax is showing that there is only one statement, but this statements is basically may consist of multiple lines of statements. So all these statements are executed if this condition is true, and if this condition is false, they are exited. But if these statements are executed, then the condition at the end of the while loop, the condition is evaluated again, and if it is still true, then these statements are executed again, and so on. And we also saw that it is extremely important that one of these statements, at least one of these statements, is supposed to change this condition. So the variables used in this condition must be changed. At least one of those should be changed in at least one of these statements. It's important so that the while loop could terminate. Now keep this in mind. The do-while loop is very similar to while loop. The only difference is that we have the statements first and we have the condition next. Condition at the end. So this is how the do-while loop syntax is. So this is statement or multiple statements. This is the body of the do-while loop. These statements are executed first. So the way it works is basically when the control comes over here, nothing happens on this do. Okay, this do is just to mark the boundaries of while loop. So there is nothing happens here. So as soon as the control comes over here, these statements are executed. Then the condition is evaluated, and if the condition is true, these statements are executed again, and then the condition is evaluated again, and so on until the condition is false, at what point the control comes over here, the while loop is exited. So you see the difference? If you notice very carefully, what is the difference? The difference is that in this particular, in the while statement or in the while loop, the condition is executed first, or the condition is evaluated first. If it is true, then the statements are executed. If the condition is false to begin with, if the condition is false in the very beginning, then the statements are not executed at all. Okay, so it is possible that in while loop, the body of the while loop may not execute at all if the condition is false in the very beginning of the while loop. Now here you can see this do does nothing, so these statements get executed no matter what. So in do while loop, these statements, the body of the do while loop, gets executed at least once, no matter what, because there is no condition that gets evaluated before these statements are executed. And then here is at the end of this execution of this body of the while loop or these statements, the while condition is executed or evaluated. If it is true, then these statements are executed again. If it is false, then it just exited. In other words, do while loop executes at least once. It does. While loop may not execute at all, but it is not possible for do while loop to not execute at all. It will execute at least once. Okay, so what's the difference? So the thing is that sometimes, you have to do things repeatedly, but you have to do them at least once. Okay, if that's the case, if you have to do them at least once, you should use do while loop and not the while loop, because otherwise what you will have to do is to basically copy the same statements here first. So you copy the statements, then you put the statements in the condition. So you repeat the code. Repetition of code is not good. It's a bad programming practice. Okay, as a beginner it's okay for you, but in general repetition of code is not good. You should avoid it as much as possible, because the maintenance of such code is hard. So what if you have to change something a little bit in these statements? Then you have to go back, remember to basically go and change in these statements as well. If you forget, your program is broke. So now this whole thing is equivalent of this thing. Okay, this is exactly what it's doing. So in order to avoid duplication of code, you should actually use this do while loop. Whenever you have statements that you need to execute at least once, the very first time you have to execute them unconditionally, then you use do while loop. So as an example, let's do something. Okay, let's write a small program. Let's do this problem. The problem is that we are going to write a program that's going to input numbers from the user repeatedly. Okay, so we have to do repeatedly. We have to do something. So that means that we have to use some kind of loop. Okay. Now, what's going to happen? So it will ask user enter a number. The user enters 10. Then enter a number. User enters 5. Enter a number. User enters 6, and so on, until user enters 0. If the user enters 0, at that point we stop. Okay. And we add all these numbers that the user has entered and keep it in a variable, and we print out at the end when the user enters 0. So if the user enters anything other than 0, we just keep on asking user what's the number, what's the next number, what's the next number, and so on. And finally, when the user enters 0, we basically display the sum of all these numbers that the user has entered. Now look at this. One thing, we have to do things repeatedly. What's the repetition? We have to keep asking user a number. Okay, so we have to do something repeatedly. So we have to use loops for sure. How many times do we have to do? We don't know. It's up to user. Until the user enters 0, we have to keep doing it. So there is no fixed number of counts. When there is no fixed number of count, you should not use for loop. So we'll keep for loop out. So either we have to use while loop or do while loop. Okay. Now, do we have to do it once at least? Yes, because the very first time we have to ask user to enter a number unconditionally. So before enter the very first number, the user could enter 0, and then we will exit. But at least we will be asking the user to enter the number at least once. So we have to do this repetitive work at least once. That means that we should not use while loop. What we should use? Do while loop. So the time is up for this tutorial. This tutorial is going to continue in the next video. I would really recommend that you watch that video, and I would really appreciate if you could rate this video as 5 stars if you liked it, and you could subscribe to this channel so that you can be notified of any new videos that I post. Thank you so much.